Titus 1:15. To the pure, all things are pure. To them that are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. See, the people that have a good conscience and want to do right, when they act, they try to do everything with that consciousness of right. But when you have that conscience seared and hardened so much that you're just doing evil, then you don't see any reason to act in what is naturally right. Whatever you believe is right to you. But even their mind and their conscience is defiled. And that's what he's saying. He said, their conscience, whether they're Christians or whether they're non-Christians, their conscience is what? Defiled. It's corrupt. It's evil. It's harmful. Their thinking, their conscience is harmful. They profess they know God. Here's the Christian part. But in works they deny Him. And in Revelation, were they judged by their faith or were they judged by their works before the great white throne judgment? Works. Your behavior. The way you treat people. Being abominable, that means detestable, disobedient, and unto every good work reprobate or undisciplined. Now, in 1951, my dad took me to town, the bigger town. I didn't go to the bigger town very many times, but my dad took me to the bigger town, and we were there for some reason. I think they were buying something in the big town. But anyway, I got thirsty. And I said, Dad, I need a drink of water. He says, okay. So he took me over to this place where there were public drinking fountains. The one on the left says whites only. The one on the right said colored. Now, I can read. I'm an 8-9-year-old kid, I can read, and I go, why is there two fountains? He said, well, that's for the colored people, and this is for the white people. And in my little child mind, this is honest to goodness truth, I thought they must have a disease. And so the whites didn't want to drink after them because they had some kind of disease, because I had been taught in school that disease was passed on by, if you drink out of the same dipper, we had to stop drinking out of the same dipper down south. We had to get our own glass. And so my mind goes, they got a disease. And I said, well, Dad, do they got a disease? He said, no, they ain't got no disease. I said, well, why can't we drink out of that fountain? He says, we can. He took me over there. He reached down and drank out of that fountain, and then I drank out of the fountain. My dad taught me by his action how to treat other people. Later that evening, we went to the theater. Now, in my local town, there's no balcony in the theater. In this theater, there was a balcony, and I was excited, man. I wanted to sit in the balcony. That's the place to sit, man. That's the chief seats. And we walked by the stairs that went up to the balcony. I said, Dad, let's sit up in the balcony. He goes, no, that's for colored people. I said, well, why do they have the best seats? How come they got the privilege of sitting in the balcony? I said, why can't we sit there? He said, we can. He took me by the hand and we walked up to that balcony. I got up to the balcony, no one was there. But graffiti was all over the walls. The seats have been ripped and torn. There was trash everywhere where the theater people hadn't even cleaned up. And I go, wow, I don't want to sit in the balcony. I said, Dad, why would these people do this? He said, son, and I'll never forget it. He says, if someone forced you to do things you didn't want to do, if someone restricted your liberty, your behavior, the freedom, the way you want to live, he said, you would retaliate too. And my little 9-year-old brain got it. See, my dad taught me by his actions. A little later that same year, down south, when you had a car and people walking beside the road, you picked them up and you took them into town. Well, one day we were going down the road, and there was a black man walking down the road. My dad pulled over and asked him, "Do you want to ride?" The guy got in, and that was my first time I'd been that close to an African American. And they were just people. We got into town, and my dad parked right in front of the senior man, the old man sitting there whittling and talking about the things of the world, the things of the, the issues of the world, like they do in those southern towns. We got out of the car, and that gentleman went his way, and my dad went to put the money in the meter, and we were going to go across the road to the store where my dad was taking me, and one of those old men said, "Willie," that was the name of my dad, "you need to be more particular who rides in your car." My dad, without missing a beat, said, "Who rides in my car is my business," and just kept walking. What did I do as a 9-year-old? I learned. My dad didn't have to sit down and lecture me. He showed me by his actions. Now, it just so happens in that same year, 1951, the NAACP had filed a lawsuit in Topeka, Kansas, Virginia, and a town in South Carolina. And in the South Carolina suit, they were trying to show that separate but equal was not equal, because the public schools gave like $30 a month to the black schools, and they gave $120 a month to the white schools. And they were trying to show this is not equal. But they put another little statement in there that said black children are being harmed by the separation in the public schools. And because they put that clause in there, the judge said this has got to go to a higher court. So they went to a higher court and they lost. Then they took it to the Supreme Court. And folks, this is a tremendous story. The attorney for the NAACP was called Marshall, who later became a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And 1952, the Supreme Court heard the case. And then they were deliberating on it. Ike Eisenhower was voted into presidency that year. They were still deliberating on it in 1953, but the Chief Justice in the Supreme Court had a heart attack and died. So Eisenhower appointed the governor of California, who had never been in the judicial system at all, as the new Justice of the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice. Now, these Supreme Court people were arguing and saying, it's all, and their attorney, Davis, who had never lost a case in the Supreme Court. Now, Marshall was a black lawyer and Davis was a white lawyer. And Davis had never lost a case in the Supreme Court. They called him the lawyer of lawyers. So they couldn't get anywhere. They were saying, the 14th Amendment doesn't allow this. The law has been a law for 60 years now, and the Supreme Court has upheld it as it's not a law, it was a ruling. It wasn't a law. You got to get this in your head. It was a ruling by the Supreme Court. Been that way for 60 years. And they said, we just can't change it, and they were split. And so they said, we need another hearing, and we want the attorneys to tell us what in the 14th Amendment gives us the right to change this ruling. And so they had another hearing. In the meantime, Warren, the governor of California, he started telling them, this has got nothing to do with the 14th Amendment. This has nothing to do because it's been a ruling for 60 years. This is a moral decision. And he wrote a summary and presented it to them. To make a long story short, the Supreme Court unanimously every one of them voted that yes, not only is separation equal but separate, not only the school was wrong for not having the same quality of education, but equal but separate was wrong. And folks, he used the moral argument. He won. All the Supreme Court justices over, and they unanimously voted and overruled the 1896 ruling of separate but equal. They did say we got to have time to figure out how to implement this. And then they came back, I think in 1954 or so, and they said this has to be implemented quickly, right now. Now, as you know, the Supreme Court doesn't make a law. They make a ruling. And so, especially the whites down south, they are just up in airs about this. In 1956, a survey that I found, only 49% of Americans believed that blacks and whites should be together. Mixed together, integrated. 49%. And although 49%, the minority of Americans believed it, it won in the Supreme Court. And I'm telling you that when it doesn't look like we have hope, folks, we got hope. Amen? Powerful. Well, of course, the southern states fought it. I mean, these people, their houses were burned. They were killed. They lost their jobs. These people, whether white or black, paid a big price. Just like in the days when whites helped slaves be free, they paid a big price. They paid a price during that time. Finally, and this went on for several years, and I grew up in this. We were a moral nation, but we were wrong. 1964, as you know, they passed the Civil Rights Act, which stated that everyone can vote, everyone can be employed, everyone can go to a theater, a restaurant of their choice, any established place, any public place, regardless of their race, their color, or their national origin. In other words, if you're born, I don't even care if you're one of these inbreded. We had inbreded people down south, and I remember my dad answering the door in the middle of the night. This people that lived up in the hollow were inbred. Their features were distorted. Their children. It was horrible. I mean, you looked at them and it was gross. Even as a child, they were totally different. And their son was sick and dying, and my dad got up in the middle of the night, who was a coal miner and worked hard, and took this guy's child down to the doctor, and the boy died. He finally did die. And my parents went to that funeral. What I'm telling you is, I had parents that showed me how to treat other people because they treated other people right. Could that be an amen? And Christians in America should be treating other people right and showing the Bible truths.